Right, a second part of lesson 49 is multiplying a binomial by a trinomial. Now we've already introduced how we multiply two binomials. We use the FOIL method. And just to review that a little bit, so in other words, the multiplication of two binomials might be a 2a plus 1 times a plus 4. And what I'm doing here, this is a binomial, this is a binomial, and we're multiplying the two of them. So in the binomials, they take this form, like 2a plus 1 is a binomial. Now a trinomial, remember, has three terms. It might look like a squared plus a minus 4 would be an example, where there's three terms. Now what we're going to do in this lesson then is we're going to take a binomial, something like this, times something like this. Now you got to remember, it's when you're trying to review or remember in your mind how you do these, remember a binomial times a binomial, you use the FOIL method. Now with a binomial times a trinomial, which I'm going to show in example 1, you can't FOIL it. It just doesn't work. So what we do, or what you have to do, is we take a look at the binomial. And what we do is we're going to take the first term. We're going to take the first term times this whole trinomial. Then we're going to take the second term times this whole trinomial. So what I mean is this. So the first term in the binomial is a. Now we're going to multiply that by that whole trinomial. And then we're going to take the second term of the binomial, which is a positive 2, so a plus 2, times the trinomial. And now it's just a matter of using the distributive property. So why aren't we using FOIL? Well, because it's not a binomial times a binomial. It just wouldn't work, because this example is a binomial times a trinomial. So now let's distribute. Let's take the first part. Let's see, a times a squared is a cubed. A times a negative 3a is a negative 3a squared. And a times 2 is positive 2a. Now distribute the 2 in the second part. So a positive 2 times a positive a squared is a positive 2a squared. A positive 2 times a negative 3 is a negative 6a. And a positive 2 times positive 2 is a positive 4. Now it's a matter of writing this in descending order like we've been doing in the last few lessons or topics. So my highest exponent is the cube, and that's the only one I have, isn't it? Now, now take all the squared terms and combine them. So a negative 3 plus 2 is a negative 1a squared, or better yet, a negative a squared. Now combine my a's. 2 minus 6 is a negative 4a, and then I have the plus 4. And I've written this in descending order according to the exponents. All right, final example is example 2, and we're taking a binomial times a trinomial. So remember how to do this. You take the first term in the binomial, which is 3x, and we're going to multiply that by that whole trinomial. And then we're going to take the second term in the binomial, which is a negative 1, and take it times that whole trinomial. And again, just like I mentioned in example 1, now it's just a matter of using the distributive property. So 3x times x squared is 3x cubed. 3x times a negative 2x is a negative 6x. And 3x times 3 is a positive 9x. Okay, we're done with the first part. Now here, distribute the negative 1. Now remember, in past examples, that'd be the same thing as just doing this. And how do we distribute a negative or a minus? Well, you just take the opposite of everything. Now I'm going to put the 1 back in there just to emphasize that these are the same. So a negative 1 times x squared is a negative 1x squared, or a negative x squared. A negative 1 times a negative 2x is a positive 2x. And a negative 1 times a positive 3 is a negative 3. So really all we've done here is taken the opposite of all those. Now, let's write this in descending order. Start with the exponent of 3. So I only have one term that has a x cubed. Now do your x squares. There's only one term. And now there should be two terms. I can see I've made a mistake here. Go back to 3x times 2x is a negative 6x squared. So that should be a squared term in there. Now combine our squared terms. So you have a negative 6 and a negative 1. Take away 6, take away 1 is a negative 7 of those x squares. Now do your x's. 9 plus 2 is 11, positive 11x. And finally minus 3. And I've written this in descending order. So hopefully, like I say, I made the mistake up here. When you take 3x times a negative 2x, that's a negative 6x squared. So we've written it in descending order, and what we've talked about in this lesson is multiplying a binomial times a trinomial.